All right, so let's discuss rule by law now. I know we've discussed this before. We're going to go over it again because it's pretty important. So, rule by law is typically found in authoritarian states. And that is when the state uses the law, the constitution, its political background, and principles to reinforce the authority and power of the state. Now, with rule of law, nobody is above the law. But with rule by law, the state is considered above the law. And this is typically done by authoritarian regimes. They're more likely to use political agents to further political socialization. Oh my gosh. And this is done to, of course, shape public opinion and citizens' political beliefs and ideologies, which is what's formed through political socialization, and they do so to enforce opinions that support the government and support the law and the government's enforcement of the law. And when they have all the citizens basically brainwashed and believing the same thing, it's going to create social order, at least what they think will be social order. So China's government, for example, prohibits Muslim Uyghur men from wearing long beards and women from veiling their faces, because native Chinese culture doesn't have that. So they want to create a more uniform culture across the state. Another example in China is that reports have indicated that China's used technology such as facial recognition and AI to track Uyghurs in cities throughout the country. So they are profiling and targeting these specific citizens. They're not doing it to every citizen, but just the specific Uyghurs. They believe that they need to follow them and check in on their law-abiding state. The government has also, I don't know why there's a big space here. The government has rationalized that these coercive methods are necessary to prevent acts of terrorism related to their separatists that seek to separate the Uyghur region from China. So they're saying, oh, we're doing it to maintain the order of the state, to maintain the state, for one, because they say they're going to break away. My gosh, I'm a little sick. All right, let's look at Iran. I'm a little sick. In Iran, former presidential candidate Hossein Malsavi and his wife have been under house arrest since 2011. So he was a former prime minister, and he ran for president in 2009 against incumbent president Mohammed. I don't even know. But the government's quick reporting of the electoral victory of his opponent. The election occurred, and then they declared his victory very, very quickly. That triggered speculation among citizens of electoral fraud, and protests occurred throughout the country. And they called for removal of the supreme leader who allowed this to happen. The government used violent force as a response to these protests, and over 150 were killed and many were incarcerated. They've greatly increased these restrictions of against protesters, and they've turned off the internet in times of protests, and they monitor social media to catch and punish citizens that they deem are trying to overthrow the theocracy or overthrow the supreme leader. They deem it as a threat to their country, a threat to the social order. When the former candidate Malsavi publicly supported the 2011 Arab Spring protests against the authoritarian governments, he and his wife were detained under house arrest, and they have yet to be released from this house arrest, which is crazy because it's 2024 now. All right, let's talk about kind of the opposite of rule by law, rule of law. And in summary, rule of law is when nobody is above the law, no matter how rich or powerful you are. If you're the president or a legislator or a judge, you're not above the law. And this is found typically with democratic regimes. The state is limited to the same rules as its citizens, no matter where you are and who you are and how you are. and when you are. In Nigeria, President Buhari fired a political ally and his top civil servant appointee after he was accused of inflating the costs of humanitarian aid projects in 2017. So essentially, what this means is that the president fired his top civil servant, even though he was on the same party as him, because he inflated the cost of aid projects. He did something he wasn't supposed to. And yes, he's a political ally per se, but he still broke the rules and he still had to face the consequences for his actions. He was investigated, he was charged, and he even faced trial. In Mexico, the Obrador administration brought corruption charges against the former head of Pemex, which is an oil company in Mexico. It used to be state-owned. And he was a political ally of former President Peña Nieto, whose administration knew about the allegations of corruption but refused to pursue criminal charges during the presidential campaign. So this shows kind of evidence of rule of law and evidence of rule by law, because we could see a refusal to pursue criminal charges. However, charges were brought on from a current administration, not current, a later administration. So they are democratizing. They're not a full democratic regime yet. They're not an authoritarian regime, though. So don't get that mixed up on your AP exam. Mexico and Nigeria are not authoritarian regimes, but they're not full democratic regimes. So this shows, though, that the allegations were previously non-investigated and no charges were passed. However, charges have been brought against the former head. So that is a sign of democratization. They are moving there. With the administration's decision not to pursue the criminal charges, it does show a struggle to uphold the rule of law. Democratization is not just a smooth process. You get there and you're done. No, there's going to be some history, some red dots coming up here and there that show your authoritarian roots. In the UK, which is it is a democratic regime, there are still times where they can struggle to uphold the rule of law. And then there are times that they do it greatly. So let's look here. Chad Evans, I think it's just Ched. He's a professional footballer. He plays soccer. He was acquitted of rape following a retrial. So he had a trial. He was found guilty of rape, and then he had a retrial, and he was acquitted of rape. That's rule of law. He was accused of raping a 19-year-old woman at a hotel in North Wales. And she has no memory of the incident. But she knows she didn't consent to sexual intercourse, even though she can't remember it. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and required to register as a sex offender. Because, we should have that for criminals. So, yeah. Now, following his conviction, Evans launched an appeal, and the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial, and there were new evidence cited that emerged during the appeal process, so they could use that in the retrial. And it got lots of media attention. However, he still received a fair trial, and they considered the evidence and found that he was not guilty. And this shows the resilience of the UK legal system in upholding rule of law by ensuring a fair and impartial legal proceedings, regardless of this guy being a famous soccer player, him having maybe some money, and for its gathering a lot of media attention. Something I wanted to point out here, in the top right corner, you can see an excerpt from a news article on the incident. In Britain, rape and sexual assault victims are legally entitled to remaining anonymous, which that individual did do. The woman who accused him remained anonymous. All right, let's talk about social and economic reforms now. This looks like a lot, but it's not. It'll be okay. So, beliefs about social and economic equality can be held by citizens in both types of regimes. Yes, I can have an opinion on the economy in China if I lived in China, and I can have an opinion on the economy of the UK while living in the UK. Actually, I have an opinion on both, and I don't live in either country. However, those opinions can vary based on the country you're in, and that's typically based on the enforcement responsibility of the state, what you're used to seeing in the state. And it also changes based on the amount of choice afforded to citizens to protect their health and their mere material well-being. So in Iran, there's a high public expectation based on Islamic beliefs in the role of charity to provide social services for the poor. So they believe that the government should support these activities as well. And the government does. They sponsor nearly 100 paragovernmental economic organizations called bonyads that are intended to direct government revenues, typically profits from the oil industry, not taxes, to give to charitable causes to help the Iranian poor. Now, why do they not use taxes? Well, the Iranian oil industry is huge. It's big and it generates a lot of money, particularly for the government. And it generates enough money that the government can provide services without needing to tax the citizens heavily. There are taxes in Iran, but they're not high at all because they get a ton of money from the oil industry. Something cool. That's our only country that really has that in our course. So these organizations are run by elite families, write that down, and have played a growing role in domestic investments across many economic sectors. And organizations have also been suspected of having too large of a role in Iran's economic decision and for delivering too little financial benefit for these intended charitable causes to help the poor. So they believe that it's not helping the poor as much as it's helping the wealthy and their allies. Any disfavor, though, has little impact because the supreme leader is the only one who can hold these organizations accountable. So the president can't do anything about it, the legislator can't do anything about it, the courts can't do anything about it, only the supreme leader. So if someone speaks out against it, nothing's going to happen because you can't overthrow the supreme leader. That's just crazy talk. So the governments of the UK and China have moved towards privatization of state-owned enterprises starting in the 1980s. So what does this mean? So the government owned various industries within these countries. China owned a lot more of these industries than the UK did. And recently, there's been more privatization. So private individuals, private groups, private organizations, and businesses are now owning these organizations and these enterprises. They're not in the government hands anymore. So they're moving from public to private. And this embraces capitalism and free market mechanisms. So in the UK, citizens have been showing support for these privatization efforts and policies by voting for supported control of the House of Commons. Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister during this time, and Thatcher supported neoliberal reforms, that's what they're called, neoliberalism, that would reduce the UK's ownership and management of major industries like airlines and telecommunications and auto manufacturing and energy. And these are getting into the hands of private entities. Thatcher's policy goal was to allow the free market to make the newly private companies more cost effective and profitable, to increase their efficiency and make them make more money, because that's the only goal of a business, is to make money. And also to reduce the state's costs. They don't have to redirect their finances to pay for airlines and energy now. They don't have to use that tax money. They could start new industries if they would like to. The National Healthcare Service has been sprung up, and that costs a lot of money. If they owned as many industries as they used to, like the airlines and telecommunications and energy, it would be very hard to fund it all. They also believe that these free market mechanisms will bring more benefits to the workers in these industries. Now, the UK has socialism in its government-run healthcare, the education, housing subsidies. It hasn't left the government whatsoever. But the government still allows some private control of major industries, like the ones previously discussed. Now, without direct elections to show public support for the policy goals, the president has one of their presidents moved forward with neoliberal policies that reduce government controls in parts of the economy. And I know I said neoliberalism before in the lecture, but neoliberalism, the basic definition of it, is reduce government controls in the economy. So they ask you that on the AP exam, which is very well that they might. It's just the reduction of government control in the economy. And a lot of the times this is through like privatization efforts. Deng supported China's transition to a more mixed economy with state-managed capitalism, which it kind of defeats the purpose. If you have state-managed capitalism, you don't really have capitalism then. You have a state-managed economy still. Before Deng, China had a full communist economy with heavy government economic control. Basically, you couldn't have any private property. All your profits were not your profits, per se. But that's changed a little bit. So the state still controls a lot of the economy, but essentially the main purpose of this is now you can have some more private property and profits. Urban industrial workers worked exclusively in state-owned enterprises, government-controlled, that provided welfare known as the Iron Rice Bowl. And this is a metaphor that describes a low-wage job, something that doesn't make a lot of money, but you have job security. It's kind of like tenure. And you also have work benefits like housing and pensions. There's not many jobs in the United States, besides like the president, that has housing provided. So yeah. There's also pensions. We have that in the United States, though. In addition to public education and healthcare, these are all connected to the jobs that the government provides most citizens. So the government has a lot to manage when it comes to jobs because you get all of these public services from these state-owned enterprises. That's what makes them so special. You get healthcare and you get education. In the United States, you don't need to have a job to get education, but in China, you have to get these public education, you need to be in a state-owned enterprise. And that can discourage people from going into private business or being employed in private businesses. These benefits, though, cost a lot of money. They have to get the money from somewhere, and these costs keep going up. And worker productivity is believed to be slowing, and this can cause the neoliberal. This can be attributed to the cause of neoliberal transition. So the government's like, oh, we can't afford this. This sucks now. Let's just get rid of it. That's essentially what they've been moving towards in some degrees. So they're relinquishing their government control in certain state-owned enterprises and making them private. That's neoliberalism. So this has resulted in more privately owned factories that have paid workers more with fewer costs and less job security for the workers. So the government's not owning them as much. You're not gonna if you do something wrong, you're gonna get fired. Makes sense. Now, unlike in the UK, China's economy can be described as state-managed capitalism because even with increased private ownership, the state still controls. That's pretty important. The state still controls the major economic institutions like energy, automaking, airlines, telecommunication, and steel manufacturing. So it's not real capitalism. There's still way too much government control that's going on here. So don't say that on the exam. Don't say that they're a capitalist economy now. They're not. Don't say that, please. Let's talk about welfare states. This is something that College Board could ask a lot about. So the state or well-established network of social institutions plays a key role in the protection and promotion of economic and social well-being of citizens. What's a social institution? Stuff like education and housing and pensions. Among the services that can be provided can be retirement benefits as well. And they have to have adequate funding. I included that in there because nothing is free. Even if the government provides it, it's still not free. It has to come from somewhere. Most of the time, this is your taxes. In the United States, states like Florida that don't have an income tax, they make up for it because they still have to make money from typically increased sales tax. States like Oregon that don't have sales tax typically make up for it with a higher state income tax. So the money has to come from somewhere. Now, among the services that are provided, they need to provide these services using the money that they're provided, which is typically through taxes. And since they are taking public money, they are going to provide public services. So, like education, you can't provide public education and say, you know what, people that are in this county, this region, you get no education. You have to pay triple for it. No, they're not going to do that. So a term here is social protection. This provides a safety net for populations, including the elderly, disabled, the unemployed, and this protects them from destitution and hardship and overall destruction. That's what the goal of welfare states are. So unemployment benefits and Social Security for the elderly and pensions and disability services and money. Those are considered social protections here. And the whole point is to just provide assistance to individuals. And typically, those are people living in poverty. And the biggest challenge with these is not only in the execution of this and defining who gets these services. It's just raising the money itself, because money's expensive. There's a lot of economic pressures that can make it difficult to finance these very expansive social welfare programs, especially if they're done at the federal level, because then you have to do the entire country. If you have a regional government doing it, like in UK, you have just the government of Northern Ireland doing it, it's going to cost a lot less. So you have a lower risk of financial instability and lower risk of debt. And there could also be a lot of execution and administrative challenges like corruption and difficulty in reaching the targeted groups or even defining who these groups are. It can be very inefficient if the group is large. For example, in the UK, their population is getting older. So if they have a lot of pensions and retirement benefits that the government provides, they're going to have to provide more of it, which not only gets more expensive, but it also could take longer to receive your benefits and your products from the government, because it has to go around more. And it may even be, if they don't want to raise prices of it, you may even get less now, so more people can receive it. Lots of different ways that they could try to compromise here. All right, let's talk about post-materialism. I think everyone here knows what materialism is, but what is post-materialism? So essentially, post-materialism takes physical things like this hippie bus right here that I found on the internet and makes them have more of a social issue. So a lot of times this could be applying pressure on the government to address an environmental issue, or an issue with like same-sex marriage, which happened in the UK in 2013. Where proponents of same-sex marriage pressured parliamentary leaders to adopt legal protection in 2013. It has led to legal protection of same-sex marriage. This is post-materialism. So we're not dealing with stuff like black people need to have access to water fountains. That's more materialist. Or certain people in certain counties can't own certain cars or houses. Houses is something we used to have in the United States. Those are more material. That's materialism. Post-materialism is going to that social valuing of self-expression and quality of life. So not necessarily needs like housing and food. Now, this effort of same-sex marriage in the UK followed legal rulings where the courts failed to recognize marriage rights for same-sex couples. So it shows change here in the country. And since March of 2014, it's been recognized in England and Wales. Scotland, it was December, and Northern Ireland just recently in January of 2020. So yeah, you learn more every day. So why would governments respond to post-materialism? It's not something like, oh, you don't need this to live per se. It's not like we're providing clean water or something. No, we're already doing that. So why would we respond to this? Well, they could invest in education, and investing in education gets such a ripple effect. Think about this. If you invest in education, you're going to have smarter kids who can do more, bring more to the economy, and teach more, and it just keeps going on and on. It gets greater and greater. As soon as you stop investing in good education and the education gets worse, all society just gets worse because people are stupid. They could also respond to it with environmental policies and regulations to make the environment cleaner and better. They could have tax incentives or provide subsidies to organizations. Tax incentives are very good for the government because that funds a lot of their programs and a lot of their policies. They could also support their civil societies and NGOs, bring about legitimacy and stability. Legitimacy is something all governments like. So if a government's doing something good and it can get support for the citizens, that's going to bolster their legitimacy. So why would they not promote post-materialism? Well, they could be prioritizing economic growth in the short term or in the long run. They could have resource constraints. Like they cannot actually fund it. They don't have the money or they don't have the technology to do it. There could be gridlock in the political system or instability or corruption and competition. They could be focusing on security measures and national security and threats. They could also just be bolstering legitimacy without promoting it. Maybe there's a large group of people in the country that don't support post-materialist efforts. So they're going to create stability and legitimacy from that group that doesn't support post-materialism. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.